I am Erin Johnston. I'm 21 and I am a hairdresser. I worked on set doing makeup for local films and whatnot, but I am in no way a filmmaker at all.
I'm Nick Bradford. I'm 23 and I work for a video production company, directing and editing different short films, commercials, other documentary type things. So we just watched The Grand Rescue, which is a Jenny Wilson film, and it was We Inspired Productions in association with Swirl Productions and Salt Mine Storyworks. And the version we watched was very, very rough. It said that it had still needed a new narrator, score, it had minor story changes, and still needed color finishing. So we watched it in a pretty rough state, and it didn't have end credits either, so I suppose it was still pretty early on in its development. So
Yep.
So first impressions.
Slow. Very slow moving.
Slow and gentle.
Yeah, I liked some parts. I didn't care for others. It was pretty rough, so it's hard to make a serious judgment call on whether or not it's a good or bad film, simply based off of the fact that it was a rough cut.
Yeah.
So that makes any critiquing a little more difficult, just based off of that fact alone. So it's hard to decipher which critiques are worth sharing and which are not.
Sure, yeah. So the story itself was based off of a climbing story in 1967, right?
Yes.
1967 in the Tetons in Wyoming, and a climber had fallen and broken legs or
something.
Totally
yeah,
follow.
they put his leg back together as best as they could. That's pretty much the only injury that I really picked up from it. But I knew that I remember connecting to the part where they were talking about being concerned about him dying from exposure, and then not being able to get him down from the mountain properly. I didn't connect well with who was trying to tell the story. I had a hard time understanding the narrator. I don't think it was made clear who the narrator was originally. I figured out eventually that it was that it was supposed to be Sinclair, but if we hadn't have figured that out, I wouldn't have known. I was trying to I thought that the narrator was supposed to be the person who was on the cot, the victim, but I didn't. Through the process of elimination, I figured out that wasn't at all who that was.
Yeah. So it was done there was like half narration, half interview based, and then the interviews were of all of the people who were conducting the rescue, and then the narration was done by Pete Sinclair, who was the author of the story and the head of the expedition for the rescue.
Yes.
But because of the reenactments, they obviously used actors or people who knew how to climb, and it wasn't clear visually, like when you're watching and when they were describing who was who. Yeah. So it was hard to follow sometimes.
So there was all this information from all of these different characters. I didn't know how they were interconnecting, and I didn't know where the story was going. So for the first 15 minutes of this film, I had no idea what was going on, which made it really difficult to get into once the ball started rolling. Once I got there, I was pretty engaged, and I definitely pulled from it a lot more of the difficulties of climbing that I wasn't aware of. It definitely opened my eyes to some of the difficulties that come with climbing and the danger that is involved. I really liked the diagrams.
Oh, they had like a animation of the mountain. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So they when they started to actually rescue who was hurt, they had they used a photograph, and it looks like they did some 3D manipulation.
Yeah, and they had drawings that indicated where they were trying to go and what the plan was. That made it way clearer for me
to understand what was going on.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I had up until that point, all I knew was they were on the north face of the mountain because they said it like 20 times.
Yeah.
That's all I knew.
Yeah.
I had no understanding of where they were, what was going on. And I think part of that, honestly, is just because the interviewees, are climbers. So they're using lingo and verbiage that other climbers would understand. But I'm not a climber.
Right.
So I'm trying to follow the story, and I'm like, I don't have any clue what's going on. So when they brought in the diagrams, that made way more sense. I was able to like visually connect what was happening.
I think more of those like visual references would have helped the film.
Totally.
A lot of the reenactments was like reused footage, and it was just shots of mountains or shots of like looking down the mountain, which were cool to look at. Mm-hmm. But if there was more visual connections of what was going on, I think it would have been a little easier to follow like through the story. The one part that I really liked was the beginning, and it had like black and white Ansel Adams type visuals. It was like time lapses and other shots of the mountains.
That really
and it kind of drew you in to start.
Yeah.
But then it kind of like there wasn't much more of that. Like
it started off with like this really climactic like look at all these mountains, and like it was really intense and like super high contrast and like whoa, cool. Like cool, you know. And then it immediately like segued into like these weird factoids by these narrators and interviewees that I didn't connect
because we didn't know who they were.
We didn't know what was going on.
It didn't like
I don't think I really understood what was happening until way later.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even understand that the person that was the victim, the guy that fell, I didn't even understand that he was being interviewed. I didn't even know who that guy was.
Right.
Like I didn't even connect who that was at all. So there was a major gap in like the connections between the interviewees and their role in the story. So that was difficult for me to make those connections.
Mm-hmm.
Had those connections been made, I think it would have been a lot easier to watch. It would have been a lot smoother.
So overall, I feel like the story was incredible. Like what actually happened. Mm-hmm. The film, I felt like didn't really meet that standard of how intense that story really was. And for that reason, I feel like it would have been a better like audiobook or just book, because then you're left to your own imagination. Yeah. The visuals didn't really connect well with the story, and who knows, we saw a rough draft, so
totally
there could be a huge difference in the draft we saw to the final.
Yes.
So it's hard to say.
Ratings.
I give it a 2 out of 5.
I was gonna say 2.5.
Unfortunately, sorry.
I was gonna say 2.5.
No personal offense.
There was some awesome stuff, but it was not enough awesome stuff to make me really engaged. It was rough to watch. It was just.
I think for a climber, it would have been really interesting.
Oh, totally.
Like for climbers, that would have been like, oh yeah, I've heard about that story. That was cool to see the film.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Well, and isn't Jenny, the woman that made the film, isn't she a climber?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we saw that online. Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense.
Right.
That I get.
Sure.
But for a non-climber, did not interest me.
Yeah.
It did not hold my attention well at all, and that's really critical for making a film that's supposed to meet the appeal of
many people.
Of many people, yeah. Of a wide variety, of people.
Unless it's a climbing festival, which it's not. It's the Anchorage International Film Festival. So
yeah. Yep.
It's more than just climbers.
Exactly.
So, thanks for watching. I'm Nick.
I'm Erin.